Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Facebook Live, Lunch and Learn with the Center for African American Health. Did you know that in addition to this wonderful live broadcast, our organization stays connected with the community via email? The center routinely publishes weekly e-blasts to announce events and important information that impact our community. For example, today in partnership with the City and County of Denver, we are hosting a free COVID-19 testing event until 1 p.m. in the parking lot just outside of our building. The Center for African American Health is located at 3350 Hudson Street in Denver, Colorado. If you missed this announcement, please visit our website and sign up for future e-blasts to learn more about our programming and community outreach efforts. Before we officially begin, and while we wait for a few more people to join, I'd like to introduce myself and tell you a little bit more about the Center for African American Health. I am the Senior Health and Living Wellness Coordinator, and essentially what that means is that if anybody is 50 and reaching the rest of those golden years, I am your person to come to. I have resources, classes, not a little shade, but I can make sure that you are well versed on what's happening in our community. The other thing is that with the Center for African American Health, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the work, we have been in the community for more than 20 years, with our focus being on committing to improving the health and well-being of the African American community. We are community-based, evidence-based, disease prevention and disease management program, events, and services. You can always learn more about our work and our programs by visiting the website at CAAHealth.org. As we move through today's session, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and we will address them if time permits. Today, we are revisiting a topic that we discussed last week, the return to learning for students this fall. During our previous Facebook Live discussion, we acknowledged some of the tough decisions parents are faced with this year and explored tips and resources that may aid in nurturing families' mental health during this stressful time. Now, I know that those concerns about our children returning to school are not just happening here in Denver, Colorado, here in Denver County with Denver Public Schools. It is happening nationwide. People are making decisions. They are questioning the decisions that they're making. They're questioning the future learning experiences for their children. And they're questioning how they as family members are going to be able to support their children in addition to other children that may have some challenges that live within our community. So this afternoon, we're going to continue that back to school conversation by delving a little deeper and addressing some of the inequities in our educational system that have been amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic. Most of us know that our educational inequities just didn't happen because of COVID-19. Joining me today is Tomi Amos, the CEO of KIPP Colorado Schools, and Pastor Vernon Jones Jr., who is also known by many other names. Pastor Vernon, P. Jones, you name it, he's out there, and he answers to all of them with a smile. He is the Director of Operations at FaithBridge Colorado. Very active and valued in our community, Tomi Amos was recently named as the CEO of KIPP Colorado, which is part of a national network of charter schools, whose acronym stands for Knowledge is Power Program. Tomi was part of a nationwide search and is the first African-American woman in Colorado to lead a network of charter schools. So big shout out and hands up for Tomi. Previously, she successfully served as the executive director for the Northeast Denver Innovation zone as part of the Denver Public Schools. My next guest is Pastor Vernon Jones Jr., and Pastor Vernon is dedicated to uplifting others. He is known in the Denver community as a passionate preacher, teacher, and respected leader. Outside the church, Pastor Vernon is known for his commitment to shaping the lives of young people, teachers, and community leaders through his work in and with schools. He serves as Director of Operations at FaithBridge, a faith-based nonprofit committed to engaging and mobilizing the faith community to ensure a high-quality education for every child. And as we know, if we don't take care of educating our children, who will? And then what do we say when they don't get what they need? I'd like to welcome you both and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
So we're gonna do this in a panel presentation. And you are both so very welcome for being here. Now, first question. Let's jump right into this conversation about the equity issues the pandemic poses for our children. What have you witnessed as some of the most challenging issues being faced by schools as they try to serve such a diverse group of students and families during this pandemic? Pastor Vernon, we're going to start with you.
Yes, thank you for that question. I've seen the challenge, to your point, the challenge is that we have a diverse group of students and families with diverse needs, and simultaneously, we have teachers and school leaders with diverse needs, right? So while they're trying to meet the needs of students, we can't forget about the humanity of students and of teachers and leaders, right? So I think the biggest challenge right now is just emotional challenge. When I think about the Center for African American Health, and I think about the focus of us being healthy, total wellness, I think there's a lot of stress being pressed upon school leaders, teachers, parents, students, and all of us are probably not managing it in the best way. I think I've seen folks they don't know. We've never been in this situation before. And so folks are all over the place. And I think the greatest challenge is that folks are trying to solve these problems in silos rather than working collectively together. Whereas, I knew growing up, many hands make light work, right? And so I think we need more hands on deck. I think we need more people thinking together. I think we need leaders, teachers, students, and families and community members working together versus what I've seen is what I call the survival status quo silos, right? Folks just trying to survive, just trying to get it through. And I get it, but I think that's the most troubling thing to me right now is I think people are too siloed and we need to be collaborating together.
Okay, thank you. Tomi, there are many families who are concerned about whether their student will fall behind during this hiatus from in-person learning. How significant do you think the potential setback may be for students who are missing formal instruction?
So I really deeply believe we need to embrace this new normal. We know that the foreseeable future, we will have some form of virtual learning that will be needed. So we can't afford to get virtual learning wrong. We can't afford to lose ground on student progress just because we're not in person. We have been given an opportunity to really reimagine and redesign school in a virtual way that meets the needs of our students and ensures really high quality instruction is happening. And so I think it's really important to name we can't go back. We can't lose ground. And so, I know at KIPP Colorado, we've been working really hard to ensure that students are going to continue to receive an excellent education. We've been working to think about building in more opportunities for live instruction so that students are able to build connections with their peers, build connections with their teachers, opportunities for smaller group and one-on-one connections and touch points just to make sure that we are not losing pulse and losing touch on the humanity of each of our kids. So that feels deeply important to us. And then we're also doing a lot of work around trauma-informed care. We know that the trauma of both the racial pandemic and the health pandemic has been a real one for our kids and for our families. And so we've worked to receive some grants to really operationalize this work in some real ways. So thinking about making sure that we have social workers on site and in the virtual space with our students 5 days a week. Making sure that we have additional professional development and support for our teachers so they know how to meet the changing and adapting needs of our students is just critically important. So we can't get this wrong.
Okay, thank you for that. We must commend the various schools and charitable organizations across the state that immediately recognize the fact that food insecurity is certainly something students and families would be challenged with as a result of the pandemic. Now, we know that many of our students were already facing food insecurities, and to the point that sometimes not even providing breakfast and lunch was important, that there were many other organizations that were filling backpacks and giving them to children for weekends and breaks. So we know that if it's a small thing in one community, it is a major issue in our communities. However, there is also a digital divide between our students that has become very apparent now that many schools have turned to online instruction. Pastor Vernon, what do you believe can be done to address this issue?
Yeah, first I want to applaud organizations like KIPP, DSST, Denver Public Schools, Aurora Public Schools. Most of these organizations have gotten to a one-to-one technology basis, right? So they at least students have the equipment, right? That's the first step. They have the Chromebook or whatever tool that they're using. The second step is, do they have reliable access in their house, right, or their apartment, wherever they live? I know that in my own home, it's inconsistent, right? It might be great for a few hours, but then that learning time, it always seems to not want to cooperate, right? So we have to be able to tap into our providers who provide the services to ensure that we have reliable access, right? That when they press connect, when they turn on their tool, that it's able to connect reliably, right? We can't have kids not able to meet some synchronous learning time because they can't connect. I mean, Comcast has got to do better. Xfinity's got to do better. Like, plan, if you're going to have outages for system maintenance, let's now start to think not to do it during learning time. They've got to start thinking about these things. And we've also got to be thinking about cost, right? We've got folks like Comcast, Xfinity, all who are providing discounted rates to families, right? But let's also think about the fact, like, Wi-Fi is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity, right? It's just like the water that's coming out the faucet, the electricity that's going through the house. It has now become a necessity, and it needs to be treated like those public utilities that are necessary, right? And so we need to figure out how we can guarantee it, not just in hot spots, but like where people live, they need to have reliable access. So that's legislative solutions. That's being able to work with local governments to make sure that we have consistent access for all families.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I had a friend who traveled prior to the pandemic and was in Taiwan to speak at a conference. And she said she was just amazed that everywhere she went, the internet was free. You didn't need a hotspot. You just plugged in and you were good to go. And they felt that it was a major issue for them in the education of their children. Yes. And so the government made internet free. Yes. So, I agree. We got to do better. Yes. There's been some discussion lately about a new term that has surfaced in the educational community known as pandemic pods. Tomi, can you explain this remote learning trend and how it might impact our families and communities?
Yep, so we are seeing this all across the country. We are seeing this locally in Colorado, here in Denver. More affluent families and families with resources and access are using that to pay for teachers, renting space to ensure that their students aren't falling behind. And as you said earlier, we know that the opportunity gap did not just present itself. It's been here, it's been real. And things like this are creating a further divide in which families with less access and opportunity to tap into something like this are potentially allowing, potentially creating inequities amongst our community. And so it's a big challenge and a big problem that I think everyone in the education space is attempting to contend with, figure out, and work through. Huge problem.
Right.
Yeah, Yolanda, can I add to that too?
Yes.
I want to say, like, there's the village concept that I grew up in, Tomi grew up in, you grew up in. Now the village needs to step up, right? Everybody else can have their privilege pods, but we had the village first, right? And so in this moment, the village needs to step up and say, we need to educate our children. There's no way, to Tomi's point, that any of our children should be falling behind, because the village is going to step up. Barbershops are going to become learning spaces. Restaurants are going to become learning spaces. Parks are going to become learning spaces. Church grounds, church fellowship halls are going to become learning spaces, so none of our children fall behind. So while affluent communities are paying big dollars for their privilege pods, right, that are exclusive and are not inclusive in any way, I'm challenging the village to say, we don't build pods, we build villages, right? So let's build villages that come alongside our schools like KIPP, DSST, Denver Public Schools, or Rural Public Schools, and build a supportive village that's going to help sustain and grow our kids during the foreseeable future. This is not going away anytime soon. So the village needs to step back up, and you know how it is, Ms. Yolanda. We know how strong the village was. We know how strong the village needs to be. So that's my call out to our villages. That let's not be focused on the pods, right? They're going to do their thing, but let's do our thing and be a strong village that supports the work that our schools are doing and the supplemental strengths that we bring to the work.
You're absolutely right. We all knew somebody's mother, aunt, grandfather, grandmother, cousin, sisters, friends, who you could go to them and find out what you needed to know.
That's
Sometimes it was just about life in general, and other times it really was something that we were learning in school, and they can always give us a different perspective, a much broader perspective on how it impacted us as a people and what we needed to do individually. We also know that we got different types of encouragement.
Yes.
We got different words of confidence and support that we could be the best that there ever was.
That's right.
And sometimes that's missing in some of our schools. And, they've got other things that must be done. And sometimes what our community needs, it just doesn't come across in quite the same way. So
you're being so kind. You're being so kind with that.
So yes, the village is where it's at, and we do need to step up. Yeah. So right now, society is scrambling, trying to make sense of all that is going on, and we're making a lot of changes, and some of them we're just flying by the seat of our pants to make those changes and hoping that they'll work, hoping that nobody says, now that was not the wisest choice, or wow, where'd you come up with those ideas? But we're looking and hoping that we're making good choices, presenting good ideas in the short term. But we don't know what may cause some significant damage later. When we look back at this time period in a few years, what do you predict school administrators, parents, and community leaders will wish they had done differently? And what can we do now? In other words, we are going to be Monday morning quarterbacking here. So what do you think will happen? And we'll start with you, Tomi.
That's a really great question. We are going to need to get back to basics and get back to people. I think that, really putting people at the center of this. Our students, our families, our community are going to be critical. And just really making sure that we are finding opportunities for our students to be seen. Visibility is key. It's going to be everything to make sure that we are finding opportunities to affirm the lived experiences of our students, their identities during this time, to just attend to them as people. And I think that those of us who can figure this out will look back and be thankful that we did. And those of us who are just scrambling with a lot of the logistical and operational pieces and not just thinking about our people first, are really going to look back and wish they had just attended to our people first. So building community is everything during this time.
Okay, thank you. And what about you, Pastor Vernon?
First, the church said amen to what Tomi just said, right?
Yes.
I think people will look back and they will regret that we operated disconnected from community, right? I totally thank you for saying that, Tomi. I also think that the challenge of the moment is going to be that people will look back and they'll say they did too many things out of fear instead of hope, right? That they're, to Tomi's point, we're making operational decisions, we're making calendar decisions, we're making all of these decisions out of fear, right? Fear and foolishness are dominating the day. That's what I say. Fear and foolishness, right? Now, we can be in a pandemic, we can be in all of these things, but Mama said we got some wisdom, right? We can operate with some wisdom and say, okay, how are we going to deal with this in a life-giving way? How are we going to move forward rather than stay paralyzed, right? We can't be paralyzed by this. We got to keep moving. And to Tomi's point, we've got to keep moving in a life-affirming way to where on the other side of this, our relationships are better. Because to your point, Ms. Yolanda, this stuff is not new, okay? The pandemic of COVID, the pandemic of the racial tensions, none of this is new, right? This is stuff that we've been dealing with. And so on the other side of this, we better have some stronger relationships or it's going to get even worse. So yeah, Tomi, I'm with you on that one, that we need to look back, pause right now and say, wait a second, is this building relationship or breaking relationship? Is this building community or breaking community? And that needs to be where we level set right now. So yeah, Tomi, I really appreciate that.
So as we wrap up, what we know is that as a collective village, we are resilient people who have amazing ideas, who can, as my great grandmother would say, can make a way out of no way with a little to nothing. We know how to do it. And so we have to rely on each other. No more of this information that's been passed down that, oh, you don't want to go here because they don't know. We all know what we know, and we all know what we're good at, and we all know how we can teach things. So, I mean, you definitely see what's coming to mind for me is Aquila and the Bee. When she was there for the spelling bee, everybody in the community, the village, some people we might have said, I'm not so sure about, but they were all standing behind this child to make sure that she made her way, that she knew she had family who supported her outside of her blood relatives. So I know with the two of you that we're making a difference in the lives of our children, and that there are going to be some little challenges, but I know you're resilient. I know you can do it. I know you're going to make us proud, and the village is going to stand right there behind you. So we're out of time, and I want to thank you both for joining me today. And for those who are listening, you can learn more about KIPP Colorado by visiting kippcolorado.org. And you can also learn more about FaithBridge Colorado at faithbridgecoforcolorado.org. This video will be available along with other information on the center's website at CAAHealth.org. Join us next week for another Facebook Live discussion. Have a safe weekend. Now, that doesn't mean go out and party with the masses. What that means is be responsible, wash those hands, use that hand sanitizer, Wear your mask. Don't ask, do I need a mask? Mask up, absolutely. And if you need to, wear some gloves. But remember, wash your hands and be safe. Thank you.